What's up everyone, Sphinx here, and today I've got some Battlefield 6 tips and tricks to help you dominate the beta and beyond. Whether you're new to the Battlefield series, a seasoned Battlefield player checking out the new game, or maybe even new to FPS games, this video's for you. I'll cover general Battlefield strategies, Battlefield 6 specific mechanics, and even some foundational FPS tips that'll level up your gameplay. Now, just so you know where I'm coming from, I've been playing Battlefield since I was 13, starting with Battlefield 2, and I've played almost every title since. I've competed in Battlefield 3, and I've been testing Battlefield 6 through labs for the last few months. I also watched hours of gameplay from last week's multiplayer event, so these tips are based on both hands-on experience and community footage. Let's get into it, and subscribe if you want more like this. Alright, we're going to start with some tips that are specific to the Battlefield series. For tip number 1, let's talk about classes. Battlefield isn't like your other shooters where loadouts are everything. Your class determines your role. Assault is your frontline fighter. Assaults are the one that will be taking as many gunfights as possible, and they have the tools to win those fights. They're also in charge of pushing and capturing objectives, and we'll talk about that more in a later section. Engineers keep vehicles alive and take enemy vehicles out. If your team doesn't do this, enemy armor can ruin the match and feel very OP. Supports are next and possibly have the most important role in the game this time around. Supports were and still will be useful for providing ammo, especially to engineers who are out of rockets. But in Battlefield 6, supports will also be useful due to their focus on healing and reviving dead teammates. Tickets are how you win or lose the game, and making sure your teammates don't die can really win you the game even if you literally have 0 kills. Recon is your scout. Their job? Spot enemies and gather intel. In Battlefield 6, they've also got access to C4 and deadly long-range tools that can flip a fight. For example, they have a perk that can prevent you from being revived if headshot. All the classes seem like they'll have more tools than ever in Battlefield 6, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Now, for tip number 2, I want to talk about how you win in a Battlefield game. Conquest is what the majority of Battlefield players play, but no matter what mode you're playing, tickets are how you win or lose the game. Now, tickets are generally lost because the enemy has more objectives than you, or they're lost because your team is dying too much. So something a lot of Battlefield veterans know, and the most important thing you can do in this game, is to PTFO, and it stands for play the objective. And the second most important thing you can do to win is to not die or prevent your team from dying by helping or reviving them. It's also important to note that Battlefield is special because you don't have to have the most kills in the game in order to be the best player in the game. Refer to tip number 1 and play your role. If you have the most objectives captured as an assault, or the most vehicles destroyed as an engineer, most allies revived as a support, or most spots as a recon, then I would argue that's just as useful, if not more, than the person who got the most kills in the game. Tip number 3 is all about squads. Squads aren't just teammates that are green. They're the most important members on your team. The most useful thing about them is that you can spawn on them. If your team is stuck at a choke point, but just one of your squad mates makes it through, that one person can turn into 4 and you could easily capture an objective that belongs to the enemy. This will attract the attention of the enemy and allow your team to break through the choke point, all because of that one person in your squad. The other most important thing about squads is the ability to revive your squad mates. Usually, only support players are able to revive, but squad mates can be revived no matter what class you're playing, ensuring that your squad stays up and doesn't get wiped no matter how many enemies you face. Alright, tip number 4 is about destruction and using it to your advantage. Destruction is not only pretty and awesome, but it's also incredibly useful. You need to make sure that you're using destruction for creating alternate pathways when stuck. If you're in a vehicle, you don't need to follow roads. Remember that a lot of the environment in Battlefield games, and especially Battlefield 6, is destructible, and you can just straight drive through walls if necessary. Also, did you know you can destroy the sides of buildings and kill the enemies that are below it with rubble? Speaking of rubble, it also seems like in Battlefield 6, we'll be able to climb rubble to access areas that are inaccessible, like the second floor of a building, which we haven't seen before in a Battlefield game, so be sure to make use of that. This doesn't even begin to cover everything you can do with destruction, and I'm sure I'll make a full video about it at some point. For tip number 5, we'll be talking about stationary weapons. Now, there are mounted machine guns, TOW or ATGMs, and even possibly anti-air placements in a lot of Battlefield games. These play a crucial role because not all classes are capable of destroying vehicles, and even if your class is, you might be out of ammo. So that's when these stationary weapons come into play, and they're usually placed in very key locations like the middle of the map, and they're super useful to know, both offensively in case you need to take out an enemy vehicle, but also defensively as you need to be worried about all the threats you face when pushing against a stationary weapon. For example, if you're in a tank, you need to know where the TOW launchers are, and actually you can destroy these placements and engineers can also repair them. Now, kind of bouncing off that tip, we have tip number 6, which is going to be about how to use vehicles effectively. Now, this can be a whole video series on its own, but the most important thing to understand is what your team's zone of control is. There are safe areas of the map and unsafe areas of the map, and this applies to all vehicles. It's very easy to understand when you're in danger as infantry, but in a vehicle you feel safe and protected even when you're in dangerous areas. Most of the time when you die in a vehicle, it'll be because you wandered into the enemy zone of control and had no friendly infantry support. Keeping that in mind alone will make you 10 times better when using vehicles. That being said, vehicles are somewhat difficult to use even though you might look at them and think they seem OP. For some more tips with vehicles, try to prioritize killing things that can kill you, so other vehicles and engineers. Finally, when it comes to flying vehicles, so helicopters and jets, it's important to just practice a little bit before even getting into a fight, as it takes quite a bit of getting used to, and going along with this, make sure your settings including vehicle sensitivities are something you feel comfortable using. Speaking of settings, tip number 7 is to just make sure all your settings are tuned to your playstyle and that your graphics settings don't limit visibility. For example, I like to turn down music, commander voiceover, and UI volume. I also disable visual fluff that hinders visibility, that's motion blur, camera shake, and chromatic aberration. Battlefield games always have a ton of settings you can customize, and I made an hour-long video which I'll link in the description that goes over every setting that I changed and what I think is important. Alright, so now we're moving on to the more Battlefield 6 specific tips. There are a lot of things that are kind of different in Battlefield 6, some of which haven't been seen ever before in a Battlefield game. Let's start talking about all the different parts that make up a class. So for tip number 8, it's super important, no matter what class you're playing as, to know all the tools you have at your disposal. Now, for the beta, it seems like we'll have a bit of a limited selection in terms of gadgets and perks, but regardless, every class will have a signature trait, signature gadget, a signature weapon. Each class will also have at least 2 training paths, which are essentially 2 different subclasses that come in the form of perks. However, I think in the beta we might only have access to 1. Finally, every class will also have 2 unique class gadgets to pick from, and 1 throwable option, usually a grenade. So I'll likely make a video on this topic breaking it down further, but it seems like Battlefield 6 is giving us more tools than ever, like I mentioned before, and it'll be important to keep all these in mind in order to fulfill your role on the battlefield effectively. Moving on to tip number 9, it seems like we're getting a good amount of movement options, many of which are pretty useful. First, we have the landing roll, which is super useful for negating fall damage when jumping from a great height. Keep in mind, it won't protect you from death. We also have crouch running, which is pretty map dependent, but super useful when you have cover that is just a little too short. Next, we have sliding. Now, this is a big one from what I've experienced and seen, and it seems fairly balanced. I know some of the community is saying it might be a little broken, but I promise it's not. The slide distance isn't so far that it can be abused, but also not so short that it's useless. I think it will be utilized most effectively when sliding into cover, but also possibly for when taking gunfights while minimizing your odds of being hit. After that, we have diving, which seems like it'll be mainly useful for diving into safety, like behind cover, rather than like drop shotting, as your gun stops shooting when you attempt to prone. You'll also be able to crawl on your back while shooting, peek around objects with contextual lean, and also mount your weapons on surfaces, which I believe just slightly reduces recoil and stabilizes your aim. Jump shotting is also in the game, but I believe it's pretty hard to use as your gun moves all over the place when you try to jump and shoot at the same time. It's also important to remember that tactical sprint has been removed as it was in 2042, and now there's only sprinting or walking. So using these advanced movement techniques will allow you to outplay your opponents using not just your gun skills, but also your mobility, and I guarantee you that most good players are going to be using some, if not all of these. For tip number 10, let's talk about the new weapon customization system. We have this cool system that's new to Battlefield, which allows us to allocate up to 100 points in the form of various attachments. So for example, if you use a suppressor that's worth 30 points and then an extended mag that's worth 20 points, you're already down 50 out of your 100 points for your other attachment slots. Now, I tried out a lot of different guns in Battlefield Labs, and I'm going to be making a gun loadout video on day 1 for my favorite build in Battlefield Labs, but the only reason I haven't already made one is because they did some balance changes, and so that gun might be completely different. So like I said, I'll try to make that on day 1 as early as possible and subscribe to stay up to date. That being said, I can share some general tips with you guys if you want to try building your own weapons. First, don't spend all your points with just a few very expensive attachments. Many of them, like I said, the suppressor can cost upwards of 35 or even 40 points, and going for many cheaper options that boost your weapon slightly is more effective than just a few attachments that boost your weapon significantly. There are many different ammo types too, and I'm not sure which ones will be in the beta, but there are bullets that delay healing, increase your mobility with your weapon, and even increase headshot damage. From what I've seen, the ammos don't cost very much in terms of points, so I would definitely recommend trying out different ammo types. The final tip I have for you guys regarding weapon customization is to only use attachments that actually help you. For example, many people will put a flashlight on their gun and never ever turn it on, or place a canted sight on their weapon and then never use it. This is a waste of those valuable points which can make your gun much more powerful. Also, remember to try your weapons in the firing range. From my experience, it loads fairly quickly and you can even modify your weapons while you're in the firing range. Now, for a bonus 11th tip, it's not technically the 11th tip, but I'm going to just fire off some rapid fire information that helps in all scenarios and also include some general useful FPS advice. So to get started, if you're in doubt about what to play support. It'll likely be the most useful role and great for learning the game. Next, scope glint is in the game when you're being aimed at by a high powered scope, so keep that in mind. And also, please remember to spot. If you're new to Battlefield, this might be a habit you don't have from other games, even if you're a really good player in those games, and it's super useful not just for your team, but also for you. For example, if you see a scope glint, spot the enemy sniper, and maybe a friendly sniper will shoot him for you. Along with that, the sweet spot mechanic is also in the game, and this basically awards you one-hit kills, even in the upper chest, as long as they're within a certain distance, not too close, but not too far. Next, be more deliberate when shooting long distance. If sniping, remember that bullet drop plays a role in where your bullet goes. And for fully automatic guns, remember that it's much better to burst rather than spray at those super long ranges. Next, suppression is a mechanic that blurs your screen slightly and more importantly will delay your automatic health regeneration even if you aren't literally being shot. Yet another thing to keep in mind is that the time to kill seems fairly quick in Battlefield 6, meaning in many cases, the person that sees their opponent first will likely win the fight. So playing slow and careful might be more beneficial, especially if you're struggling. Now, for some general FPS related tips, remember to keep your crosshair always pointed at head level, even if you don't see anyone. This will mean that if you do happen to run across someone, your crosshair will already kind of be near their head. Also, remember to move with cover. Try to avoid crossing wide open areas, especially in hostile territory where you have nothing to hide behind. Lastly, and most importantly, remember to stick with your squad and team. Playing with your team is not only the best way to do well and win in Battlefield 6, but personally, it's also the most fun way to play the game. I'm super excited for the beta, and I hope these tips help new players and maybe even veterans have a more positive experience. Like I said, I'm going to be posting loadout guides and maybe even another tips video down the road, so remember to subscribe to stay up to date. This was Sphinx, thank you for watching.